Hey friends, today let's dive into a controversial and fascinating question. Was Winston Churchill gay? Now, this isn't just idle gossip or sensationalism. We need to look at history with fresh eyes and open minds. Firstly, it's important to note that Winston Churchill, the iconic British Prime Minister, lived in a very different time. Attitudes towards sexuality were much more repressive back then. As a young cavalry officer, the old Harrovian Winston Churchill was accused of having participated in acts of gross immorality of the Oscar Wilde type with fellow cadets at Sandhurst. Still, he successfully sued his accuser for libel, and there is no evidence that, as an adult, he engaged in physical homosexual relationships, yet he was far from being straightforwardly heterosexual. Although he worshipped his beautiful American mother, he showed a lifelong aversion to women. In Churchill's only novel, Savrola, the autobiographical hero has a purely chaste relationship with the heroine, obviously based on Churchill's mother. He seems to have had a low sex drive and married rather cold-bloodedly, aged 33 for social and dynastic reasons, just after being appointed to Asquith's cabinet. Though he came to depend on his Clemmy in many ways, she was often exasperated by his emotional unresponsiveness and treatment of her as a childbearer and housekeeper, and more than once considered leaving him. While he never showed much interest in women other than his wife, Churchill's life was marked by a series of close platonic relationships with attractive young men. Prominent among these were Eddie Marsh, a civil servant who served devotedly for 25 years as his private secretary, whom Churchill described as a friend I shall cherish and hold on to all my life. Archie Sinclair, a cavalry officer, whom he chose as his second-in-command on the Western Front in 1916, as his personal assistant as War Secretary and Colonial Secretary in 1919 to 22, and finally, after Sinclair had become the leader of the Liberal Party as Air Minister in 1940, Bob Boothby, the youngest and most handsome MP, whom Churchill, as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 1920s, appointed his PPS despite the bumptious Boothby having criticised his policies, and Brendan Bracken, a young man on the make whom Churchill, to the horror of his family, effectively adopted in the 1920s and who served as his right-hand man during the 1930s, finally becoming Information Minister during the Second World War. Of these four, Marsh, who developed crushes on young writers and actors, and Boothby, who had a taste for rough trade from the criminal underworld, were certainly predominantly homosexual. And Bracken, though he cloaked his private life in impenetrable secrecy, probably too. Like Rosebery and Beauchamp, Churchill seems to have had feelings towards his son, Randolph, that verged on the amorous, another factor that estranged him from his wife, who disliked the boy from birth. Though these feelings cooled as Randolph lost his looks owing to excessive drinking and became a coarse womanizer. Arguably, the intensely narcissistic and exhibitionistic Churchill was romantically drawn to men rather than women, even if his relations with them stopped short of the physical. Homosexuality was illegal in the UK until 1967, so even if Churchill had same-sex attractions, it would have been incredibly risky for him to be open about it. Churchill was married to Clementine Hosier, and by all historical accounts, they had a loving relationship. They had 5 children together. But does a heterosexual marriage completely rule out the possibility of him being gay or bisexual? Not necessarily. Throughout history, many people have lived double lives due to the societal pressures of their times, and some scholars and biographers have speculated about Churchill's close male friendships. One name that often comes up is his relationship with Eddie Marsh, his private secretary. Their letters reveal a deep bond and a great deal of affection. However, it's crucial to remember that expressions of friendship and love between men were more common before the 20th century's rigid definitions of masculinity took hold. Another point of speculation is Churchill's time at Harrow, an all-boys boarding school. There he formed intense friendships, but again, this was typical of the era. Boarding schools were often environments where emotional and physical bonds between boys were normal, even if they didn't necessarily denote a sexual relationship. It's also worth mentioning that no concrete evidence exists to confirm Churchill's sexual orientation. Most of what we have are inferences and interpretations of his relationships and personal letters. Without definitive proof, it's crucial to approach this topic with caution and respect. So, was Winston Churchill gay? The honest answer is we don't know. What we can say is that he was a complicated figure living in a complicated time. Whether he had same-sex attractions or not doesn't change his monumental impact on history. It's a reminder that sexuality is just one facet of a person's identity, and history is always more nuanced than it appears. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this and want more thought-provoking content, hit that subscribe button and let me know what historical figures you'd like me to talk about next. See you next time on the Great Who Is channel. Click like and subscribe below.